The character of a person is, I would say, probably the most important part of any business transaction, because there's a lot that they can withhold from you. There's a lot that they know and they don't want the seller to know or the buyer to know.
Welcome to Business Buying for Financial Independence. I'm Tim Delaney, and I help young professionals buy small businesses so they can escape the 9-to-5 and take control of their time, income, and future. If that sounds like you, hit the subscribe button and let's get into it. Today's guest is Jason Orr. Jason is a real estate investor, business owner, and father of 4 from South Dakota. Thank you for being here, Jason. It sounds like an awesome day in South Dakota. So why don't you start out by telling everybody a little bit about yourself, where you're from, and what you do.
Thanks, Tim. It is a nice day in South Dakota. I think we're probably mid-80s right now, and I'm outside on a walk instead of sitting in front of a computer.
Very nice.
So, yeah, a little bit about the background. With the dads, I have 4 children, ages 6 to 12. Youth sports pretty much runs our life. With the 3 olders, we're always traveling to different cities, playing baseball, softball, soccer, basketball. 2 of the younger ones are in dance. A lot of times I introduce myself as being from rural South Dakota, as I am from rural South Dakota. The population of my town is 13,000 people in Yankton, South Dakota.
Very nice. And you are a real estate investor and a business, somebody who has purchased businesses and sold a business, which I'm pretty excited to talk to you about today. Do you want to maybe give a little background on how you got into, I think it was real estate first before you purchased your first business?
Yes. I graduated college in 2009, and I was always pretty hungry. I usually had 2 or 3 jobs, part-time, full-time, and I was always wanting to be successful. I read a couple motivational books, and it was the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad that really made me decide I need to start buying rental houses. I remember pretty clearly, I think it was about April, and we were graduating in May. In April, I was like, I don't know what's next. We better find a house to rent. And then 1st of May, it turned into, why would we rent a house after college? We better buy a house. So I bought a $54,000 house. My girlfriend at the time, we ended up getting married. I started having children. And when we had the second child, we bought a new house and kept the old house as a rental house. And it grew from there. I'd gladly dive into that.
Yeah, I want to back up just a second, though, because you talked about graduating in 2009, and that's when you bought your first house. If I recall, the country was in a bit of a recession already at that point, and housing prices were dropping, and there was a lot of fear in the markets. What made you decide you wanted to buy a house at that point instead of renting?
I didn't know any better.
It's a good answer.
In rural South Dakota, everything's affected slower than on the costs.
Yeah.
I think as a whole, I understood that there was a mortgage crisis going on, but like when you're buying a $54,000 house, full-time income, it wasn't a huge concern, but it was also a leap for me. Because I want to say my mortgage with principal, interest, and taxing, escrow, I think it was like $463. So it was a pretty minor risk.
Yeah. So even a $54,000 house sounds crazy in today's day and age, but for the area that you were in, and like you mentioned, even in Buffalo here where I am, which a lot of people would consider close to the coast, we're affected much slower than a lot of other markets. So I can relate to things not necessarily hitting rural South Dakota as hard as other areas of the country. So you moved out of that house, you bought another house, you kept that as a rental, and then you decided to keep going with real estate. How did that come about?
When we went from the first house to the second house, it was when we were expecting our second child. Our first house was a 2-bedroom. We were converting a 3rd basement room into an additional bedroom, and we outgrew it. So moving into the bigger house, it was scary. I remember doing a lease application, figuring out the first AC problem. It was scary, but you navigated it, reached out to friends who've done it before, and I just moved forward. At the time, I was working 2 jobs, which at that point, I think it was outside sales for a industrial supply company, and then working at UPS as a morning preloader, 3:30 to 8:30 every morning. And as we're going into the property side of things, it just escalated from there. I engaged a real estate agent to help me look, and I might have got 1 or 2 houses out of that. But every time, you'd save up a down payment. I was putting it toward a single family house, and 10 years later, we had 26 houses. Over the years, we've sold 2 of them. One was so we could buy the lot that we built our house on, and one of them was to help buy a business.
So yeah, so it's the kind of the main point of this particular podcast is talking about buying businesses. So you mentioned you sold one of the houses to buy a business. What was that business? When was it? And how did that come about?
The first business I bought was a window cleaning company. The terms were very favorable as far as the purchase price. I had to give them a down payment, then we seller financed the rest because there was no equity or collateral that could be held against the lender. But yeah, fortunately, there was equity in houses that I was able to come up with the money to leverage into a business that the remaining of it was seller financed.
Nice. How did you find that particular business? Were you looking to purchase a business, or was it just something that kind of came to you?
I was pretty hungry again. How that business came to me, I was working preload at UPS where you have 6 people loading trucks, and one of the people there worked for this company at the time, and he was thinking about buying it. And then at the time, he ended up becoming a full-time driver and passed on the business. So then it pretty much fell into my lap, and I pursued it further, and then we ended up buying it.
Okay. So I just want to touch on something there because I see this often, or I hear this often when I talk to people in any kind of job is sometimes you get, so it sounds like that preloading job. From what actually, let me back up a step. From what I've heard from some people that I've known that have worked at UPS or FedEx in the past, sometimes you start out in those types of loading jobs and then hope to work up into a driver role. Is that fair to say?
Yes. Yep. You're exactly right. You start as the part-time, and then a bid sheet goes up whenever a job's open, and the person with the highest tenure gets it.
Yeah. So this guy was offered a quote unquote better job in the industry and decided to take that because it probably felt and looked more safe and secure to him than going out and buying the business. So his gain or loss, however you want to look at it, was your opportunity to buy that window cleaning business. How long did you negotiate with the seller? How did the negotiation go?
Well, let's say the first meeting was at his kitchen table. Pretty macro conversation. Now that I look back after knowing what I know now, I definitely didn't dive into that as deep as I should have. But yeah, it was really brief. This is what we made the last couple of years. We didn't go into profit and loss. It was just a gross revenue standpoint. I want to sell it for this. How much can you pay? And I was transparent. And it was like a little over half of the business. And then he's like, well, I could maybe help seller finance some of it. I don't think he used the word seller finance, but I can help you do payments. And I would say 6 weeks later, after some back and forth conversations, we ended up with a deal that I actually paid, I think it was 20% down of the price. And then he seller financed the rest, which was more than our initial conversation, but it helped my cash flow at the beginning and helped me not be stressed as making a jump from having a W-2 to having, completely self-employed. And to go back on that, I did keep the UPS job for quite a while, the secure morning hourly wage that gave us benefits while kickstarting the window cleaning.
Nice. Smart move from that perspective. And as you said, you were hungry and willing to work. You'd already been working 2 jobs anyway, so it probably wasn't a huge lift. The negotiation, I want to touch on the fact that your first meeting was at his kitchen table. This is something I just had a conversation with somebody yesterday about the transaction process when you're buying and selling a business is often a very personal exchange. Like when you're buying and selling real estate, it's often through brokers, realtors, and even when it's not, it's a very transactional thing a lot of the times. With a business, you really end up getting to know each other as a buyer and seller. You have to kind of win each other over and make sure that the person likes you. So it's very telling that the fact that your first meeting was at his kitchen table, it just kind of reinforces that point that you have to be willing to get along and kind of connect with a seller in those situations. So then talking about seller financing, it's something that comes up often. I'm guessing from the way you described the financials, you wouldn't have been able to necessarily go to a bank because he wasn't keeping super good bookkeeping kind of thing. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that is fair to say. They didn't have a QuickBooks produce profit and loss. I'm still baffled how they did that all pen and paper, but yeah, he actually had two businesses commingled into the same bookkeeping, so he had to separate it for me when we went to evaluate it.
Yeah. And that's, so did that make you nervous at all during that due diligence process of, well, what if he's not separating everything properly? What if there is really no profit here?
Yeah, it did. I had been looking for something else too during that time. Like I had looked at a few other things and I was so ready to make the jump that I had the gut feeling that this was a good deal. And judging the character of a person is, I would say, probably the most important part of any business transaction, because there's a lot that they can withhold from you. The struggles, the actual wins. There's a lot that they know and they don't want the seller to know or the buyer to know. But in the window cleaning and then the water restoration I'm doing now, I felt really good about the character of both sellers.
Yeah, and that's a great point there. We can dig deep into the numbers, the financials, the marketing, payroll records, but at the end of the day, a lot of it does come down to gut feelings and the trust of the person that you're doing business with. Back to my comment on really being able to connect with that person, the owner's personal level, so that you can build that trust. So that's a good lesson there, that you have to trust your feelings sometimes, and you have to be willing to take a chance, take a risk when you are pretty sure that it's right. So you touched on the water restoration company. So before we get to that, after you purchased the window cleaning business, what was did you have a plan going in to grow the business at all? Was there something you did day one or month 6 or whatever to grow?
Well, that's certainly another response that I would say that I didn't know what I was doing when I look back and reflect on what I did. Mm-hmm. My mindset there was just to get out there and clean as many windows as possible and try to gain more revenue. At that point, I didn't understand scaling or marketing or, removing yourself from the operation, from the labor and trying to grow it. I did that the hard way. I did that for 7 years. I learned a ton, made a lot of great relationships, but I would say I could have done that a lot better.
Yeah. Well, there's nothing wrong with jumping into the business and doing it yourself, especially at first. And that's what I did when I bought my wine and liquor store as well. Is I spent every day there for the first 3-4 years, just partially because I only had 2 part-time employees, so somebody had to be there, and partially because I wanted to make sure that I knew the ins and outs of the business very well. I know there's a lot of gurus out there that say, buy a business, don't buy a job, don't go work in the business at all. But I think you're missing something if you don't at least roll your sleeves up a little bit at first and do some of the work to make sure you understand it fully. So I don't think you did anything wrong there. So 7 years of washing windows and kind of being in the business. What was the next step? Is that how you then decided to exit, or did you hire more people?
We ended up at the end, I think, with 4 to 5 pretty part-time employees, maybe 2 that were full-time. It was definitely a variable because we got slow in the winter. It was hard to actually keep somebody full-time all year, but we ended up making it work with some flexible employees. So
Gotcha. And then you eventually decided to sell the business. What prompted that decision?
yeah, after we accumulated a fair amount of houses, I was really at a turning point of thinking I was going to be a full-time real estate investor or what my next chapter was going to be. I had a friend who was a real estate appraiser, and this was at the time when they were underwater. They're like the interest rates were down, so everybody was refinancing. And I started helping him while doing the window cleaning. And then I considered what life would be like without window cleaning. And then I thought together the businesses of appraising and investing could work together.
Mm-hmm.
They don't so much. But back to the window cleaning. I had a few people in town that I would say kind of consider a mentor, and one of them's a broker, and I was telling him about it while I was being a real estate appraiser. I'm like, I might look at exiting window cleaning if somebody else wanted to take it over. And he texted me later that evening and said, I think I know somebody. And 5 minutes later, we learned that we both knew the person pretty well. And I negotiated with that buyer there probably a month or so and came to the agreement that he'd work for me for a little bit and then buy it when the time's right. And that's what happened.
Nice. So this person came about from a connection of just you kind of making a comment that you might be ready to sell, and turned into sounds like a pretty quick negotiation. How did that person structure their purchase? Did they go to a bank, or how did that work out?
That was a pretty great transaction, actually. I had known the family before this, and I've become really close with him now. He was frustrated with his current job, and at some point told this broker that he was looking for something else. And I think they explored a few other options, and us connecting was a really good thing because it satisfied my need and satisfied theirs. Our negotiation, I think I was really fair, but it's one of those things you look back, you're like, was that too low or was that way too high? I don't know.
Yeah.
But our negotiations were well. They funded it. I'm not 100% sure how they came up with their capital, but then I seller financed a good portion of it. I think it was a third of it.
That's a reasonable amount to be willing to hold as a seller of a business to make the buyer more comfortable. As a buyer, I tell people to always ask for seller financing of some sort, even if it's, just 10%. It helps show that the seller has nothing to hide, that they're willing to stand behind the business that they're selling, that they're not trying to dump it and run away because they know something's broken. And so being willing to hold a third is, it's all from the selling side. It's a good way to maximize your value as well, because the more you stand behind it, the more comfort level the buyer will have to spend more money on the business, in my opinion. So it's a good amount. What can I ask on the purchase when you bought the window cleaning? The seller financed 80% of it. How long of a period of time was that over?
And that was a while ago. I want to say that was I think it was 3 years, give or take.
And then what did you do on terms when you sold, when you financed a third of it?
No, now it is the same. I did 36 months also.
Okay, good. It's so it's enough time where the buyer has you around to some extent. Not that you have to answer questions or help in any way, shape, or form, but in theory, if you as the financer wants to get paid and they need advice, you're probably willing to give it. Not that you wouldn't be anyway, but it definitely holds some sellers accountable. And then you sold the window washing business, and you're doing the appraising and the real estate. What came next in the business world? Yeah,
I just thought of something I should share with that window cleaning exit.
Sure.
The person that we went into agreement with to sell to, my stipulation was it had to be what we were building a house at the time. It had to be when the house was done, when we would close. So unfortunately, I think we thought it was going to be like 6 months away, but it ended up being like 18 months away. Yeah, no, it stressed me out hard during that time. I proactively reduced the price a little bit. I think that was the only concession I made. We were still doing the seller financing, but it's just another good point that when there's trust, you got to be fluid and try to make it right.
Yeah, that's so that's an interesting stipulation that wouldn't probably come up in most business transactions, but that's one of the flexible options you have when you are seller financing as well, as opposed to going to a bank. So if that buyer had gone to get an SBA loan or any kind of bank loan on the purchase, when the bank said that they were ready to give the money, he probably wouldn't have been able to hold them off for 18 months while you finished your house. So, and he might have lost financing opportunities in that process. So it's a good flexibility piece that you have there. And it was probably not completely necessary that you lowered the price, maybe, depending on the terms of the contract, but a good gesture. And as you said, a good trust building, piece that you already had some trust with him, but just to show that you were understanding, that's got to be rough from a buyer's perspective, that you think you're going to close in 6 months and you add an extra year onto that. But in the end, it seems like it worked out for everybody.
Yeah, no, you're right. That the seller financing gives you a lot more control compared to the lenders.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's something, we're mostly talking to buyers here on this podcast. Just something to keep in mind if and when you ever sell a business as well, is you have that control as the financer. And that's something that you can even use as a selling point to a seller when you're pitching the idea of seller financing. If they're, if you're negotiating a business to purchase and the seller doesn't seem on board with that concept or doesn't want anything to do with it, it's one of the selling points that you can point out to them is, hey, a bank might take a month, might take 6 months. Who knows if the bank will even finance it? But if you decide to finance it for me, then we can move on your timeline and close when you're ready to close. So I like that. Thanks for remembering to throw that piece in there. What, so window washing is sold. You're doing some real estate. You're doing some appraising. What comes next?
Yeah, I was an appraisal trainee is what they call it. You have to work under a supervisor for a certain amount of hours before you can go on your own. And I was in the process of the negotiations with the state on getting your certified residential, which is being able to appraise on your own. And at this point, the appraisal industry wasn't that bright. There was a lot of talks about AI taking it over. I don't know, you get into the rooms at the conventions and they all say this too. It's the 55-year-old white crabby guy is who you're around the whole time. And I was a little more like young, energetic. How can I make this better? And like, there's not much change going on there. It didn't seem long term. I felt that's not what I wanted to do. So I started looking for some businesses to buy. I'll say I probably underwrote 3 of them pretty hard and had the fish in the water for about every distressed person I could think of in our area. And then I decided I wanted to do something that was going to complement the rental property maintenance. So that put me on the hunt for any kind of service industry that services residential real estate. And that's what I became very attracted to, water restoration. I actually got into some pretty deep conversations with 3 franchises where I was going to buy a neighboring community's franchise and grow it to our town, or I was going to start a whole brand new one. There were 3 pretty big named franchises that I was close to signing and going down to Florida and doing their training session. I was at a GoBundance conference. That's a mentorship group I'm in, and 2 people there were pretty big into the water restoration business. And both of them said that would be dumb to do a franchise. You're paying 10 to 11% gross royalties each month. Why don't you just call everyone in your area and see who wants to sell? And for like 20 seconds, I'm like, I don't want to do that. And I'll bet 2 minutes after that, I stepped out to the balcony and figured out the numbers of the 2 people around. And one said no, and one said, I could talk with you. And that was the start. That was May 1st of 24. And then January 1st of 25 is when we closed on the business.
Awesome. So you were at a conference with other like-minded individuals striving for bigger, better things that were willing to push you a little bit because
That's what groups like that do. If for anybody out there listening, GoBundance or another group that I'm a part of, Front Row Dads, and there's plenty more out there that do an awesome job of kind of connecting people that are high-level thinkers, doers, and push each other to take action. So you're talking about doing this franchise, which is, to most people, it's like, good for you. You're going to take action. You're going to do something. But these guys challenge you to do it yourself. Why pay royalties when you don't have to? You're a smart guy. You can figure it out. You don't need a playbook handwritten for you. You closed in January, which is a pretty good timeline. How did you go about the negotiations on that and the financing on that one?
Well, that conference was in Austin, Texas, and we arranged to meet right when I got back, fortunately. So 3 days after that call, we met at my house, and in such a small community, it was interesting that I didn't tell them. We met at my house. We didn't go over numbers. We didn't go over anything. I just knew I should tell them exactly what I'm looking for, explain my values, what I'm looking at doing with the business, where I'm at, what my past was. And they pretty much left and said, okay. And I think maybe 2 days later, I talked to the husband, and we had another meeting that was very brief number talk, maybe like total gross that we've done. We've been doing this for 30 years. This is everything to us. This is our life's work. We're close to retiring, but maybe not quite. And after getting to know them better and touring the facilities, I kind of made a mental decision, like, this is it. No matter what, let's get this done. Mm-hmm. And then we went into a different couple business valuations, and one by a CPA was pretty extremely high, which had us dead in the water for a little bit. And then with my local lender, we talked through it, and well, that doesn't support cash flow. There's no way we can do that. And we thought it was valued a little high, and we ended up just ordering a fair market third-party appraisal. And then, of course, that comes lower. Mm-hmm. And I'm expressing, like, I'm really hungry. I want to do this. Here's the number we got from the third party. Here's your number. Can we talk? And that was probably 4 months. And honestly, I bet we were dead in the water twice. Like, I damn near went into depression for 2 nights, and it ended up sparking back up. But there was a lot to go into there. I don't know how deep we should go into that. I gladly could give a little bit of a brief on that.
I think it would be worthwhile. I think, because I think almost any time there's a business transaction going on, there's always going to be ups and downs. The deal's dead, the deal's alive. So it might be worthwhile to share with the listeners a little bit more about that emotional roller coaster and some of the nuts and bolts of how you as a buyer got past some of these hurdles.
Yeah. So the initial asking price was all 3 buildings and the book of business with vehicles and goodwill. The buildings is really the only thing I had experience in. I'm like, I want the buildings. I don't want you to keep the buildings. So at the beginning, they're like, okay, well then we'll just have to put a number on them. So then that was the number we were playing with. And I had a lot of in-deep conversations with my lender, who is a local community bank. It's not one of the big Wells Fargo or Chases. It's a great community bank where the lender has a little more say. They go to loan committee once a week and get different opinions from people. And we really didn't find a way we could make that first number work. We looked at how to refinance some of the property to get the capital needed to just have money there without debt service. We looked at trying to extend the amortization as far as we can. That way cash flow can look good, and just trust that Jason's going to do it better in the next couple of years to get positive. And it really came down to, like, I'm not going to do this for you, Jason. And it was fair. They were really good conversations with the lender. And then I went back, and I never wanted to give up the buildings. I wanted the buildings. Again, I'm like, this is all I understand. I got to learn the business. Yeah. So then I offered a number that was lower, like above the third party appraisal, but below the CPA appraisal. And I think he said, my simple answer to that is no. And that was one of the times I went into depression for 2 days. Brainstormed every option I could. Fortunately, the sellers came to me. They said, what if you rent the buildings for 5 to 10 years to help our payment? Because then we're going to get over $100,000 in rent a year. And then we sell it to you when the lease is over. I'm like, God, I thought I was the creative one, and I didn't think of that. I'm like, okay, we're getting somewhere. How are we going to do this? Like, let's keep working. So then our number was still a little off, but they were really fair in the leasing dollar amount, which allowed the cash flow to be underwritten for the lender to get comfortable. And then they ended up seller financing a little bit of it to help bridge the debt service number that we were trying to hit. And wow, that's a big 30,000 foot view of 6 months of negotiating.
Yeah, that sounds, if that's the high level, obviously there was a lot more back and forth and into the weeds for that whole process. And I think there's a couple good lessons in there for people that are looking at businesses. First of all, if you're looking at a business with real estate, the fact that, obviously you wanted to buy the real estate with the business, but you don't always have to buy them together. I would always recommend it if you can. And obviously it sounds like you would as well. But we both come from real estate backgrounds. There are people that don't want anything to do with owning the real estate, and that's fair enough. It is another business in a way that you have to operate. But when you are buying the real estate with the business, it sounds like you were doing the right thing. And in your numbers you were evaluating each separately, the business and the real estate. And you were still planning to pay rent, even if you had purchased the buildings outright right away, you still would have had underwritten rent in your business expenses because the buildings are a separate asset and need to be treated separately. So just to keep that in mind for anybody listening that's looking at both, just because you buy the buildings doesn't mean you don't pay rent. You want to set those up as separate entities and pay yourself rent so that the buildings stand alone as a separate entity. And then the fact that you're, in some ways, it doesn't sound like you were doing this necessarily intentionally, but a good negotiating tactic in general is working with a lender that understands the business, understands you, understands your goals, and then letting them also tell the sellers that their price doesn't work, that the cash flow is not there. If nobody is going to finance the business, they could sit around for decades and waiting for somebody that's going to come along and just pay them cash, which probably isn't going to happen. Most people are financing business purchases, and if the lender is saying, hey, this doesn't work for Jason, it's not going to work for the next guy that comes along, it's not going to work for anybody else at that price because the cash flow is not there. So it's a good negotiating tip, is to use that lender to your advantage if the price doesn't work. And then, so you get bank financing, you get some seller financing worked in as well, which, as I mentioned earlier, it's always nice to have that little bit of seller financing, even as just a small piece to help everybody in the deal. The bank, yourself, be comfortable that the seller's not trying to pull one over on you in any way, shape, or form. So that's awesome. So that was January 24. You closed on that. So you've been in it a year and a half now. How's it going? And have you made any substantial changes to the business?
Yeah, actually, that was January 25. So that was just
January
6
25.
months ago.
Sorry. Real recent. So 6 months ago. Have you made any changes in 6 months?
Yeah, actually, I want to back up to the financing a little bit. Another thing just popped in my head.
Yep.
When we were underwriting it with the lender, if the property was involved, the amortization could be longer. When property isn't involved, they didn't want to go more than 10 years. So that makes the debt service really hard to meet if you're, reaching in price as we were. Well, I want to say the local lender was willing to go 20, maybe even 25 years if the buildings came with it. And since we closed without buildings, it had to be 10 years.
Great point. That's, something even, so local lenders, SBA financing as well will give you a blended term if you're buying real estate with the business purchase versus usually when you're buying just a business, it's going to be a 5 to 10 year term from a bank max. That 10 years is usually the absolute limit. So that's a great point. Thanks for bringing that back up. Because it's a shorter amortization period, it increased the monthly payment, which also made it a little bit harder to show cash flow to the debt service. So that's another advantage of buying the real estate with the business at the same time. But, obviously if you can be creative and find other ways around it, like it sounds like Jason did, then why not? Did you fix the price of those buildings in 5 years or whenever the lease ends, or is that going to be negotiated at that time?
That's negotiated at that time. I feel the sellers will be fair, but no, it was a hard number to put because if it's 10 years from now, that could vary up or down a fair amount.
Yeah. Yeah. It can fluctuate a lot. But the other, one of the other keys to remember with commercial real estate, you are valuing those buildings based on the NOI of the buildings. So the rent coming in minus the expenses, divided by the current cap rate in the area. As a tenant now, Jason does have the advantage or freedom if for some reason the sellers are not reasonable in whenever it's time to sell with the pricing on it. He has the freedom to move the business to another location, whether he buys buildings somewhere else or whether he rents somewhere else. And then the buildings won't be worth nearly as much if they don't have tenants in them. So it's not that you want to be vicious. I can't think of the right word for that, but it keeps everybody in the transaction honest of, hey, let's be fair, because everybody has options. They could raise the rent on you a ton if you try to lowball them, or you can move if they don't want to charge you too much for the buildings. Anything else on the acquisition part of that deal?
Yeah. Engage your local development group. Ours is called District 3, and it's often referred to as an SBA office, but it is a great community. They work with a couple different entities to assist. There were some other businesses I evaluated before the water restoration, and I made a relationship with two ladies at this office. And when I got serious about them, they're like, well, send me the numbers, I'll spread it and we can go from there. So having somebody back that down and spread it and then give their opinion, because there are some other lenders than community lenders. There's some other groups that look at lending to different communities. So your local office will be a lot more familiar with options than you even think you are. Where I thought I was pretty creative and knew some ways to do it, they found a source that helped me finance that. And they're really helpful, really helpful.
Great advice. And most cities and communities around the country have something like that. Might be called something different in your area. I know in Buffalo, besides the actual SBA office, we also have the Small Business Development Center, which is affiliated with one of the universities that does something similar. If you're evaluating a business, whether it's to start or buy, they will look it over with you and figure out what you're missing or what you should be looking at. Another nationwide resource is called SCORE, SCORE. They're a network of mentors that are free that will help you evaluate and analyze as well. And they might have connections to the industry that you're looking at. Which also reminds me of something I wanted to touch on too. The fact when you were initially meeting with this guy, you said the first meeting you didn't even talk numbers, but in the second meeting with some very basic numbers with revenue, I'm willing to bet that because you had already evaluated those franchises in this industry, you were probably able to make sense and kind of back into what kind of business he was doing and what the bottom line roughly looked like based on just some high level numbers he was giving you. So that practice evaluating other businesses and specifically businesses in that industry probably really gave you an advantage in knowing what you were looking at there.
And looking into those franchises, it also had me in that abundance group talking to people doing it.
Yeah.
And they knew where margins should be on each service category. Like some people do recon, some just do the mitigation, some do cleaning items, and you know where the margin is on each one. So if you're doing all three of them with a blended margin, they got a good idea where you should be. Where if you just do water mitigation, which is the highest margin, they know the multiple you should be there. And also going back to, there was another business a year before that had very similar numbers that I ended up losing out on. If I didn't underwrite that one hard, I would not have had the confidence to approach this one.
Awesome. That's a great point. So that's the getting your reps in, getting practice. You don't want to waste other people's time necessarily, but if you can get access to the information and start underwriting more and more businesses, you'll have that confidence when it comes time to actually pull the trigger, make an offer, and close a deal. So a great point on that one as well. And so then I guess then getting into this business. So 6 months in, what's your day-to-day look like? What does the business look like now compared to December of last year?
When evaluating it, I identified a few things that I thought should be changed. And once you really get into the business, it's not as easy to do.
Yep.
The CRM was more pen and paper, Excel and Word, where we looked at a couple different CRMs to implement. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is going to be a huge list. I don't think we're ready for this. Where that was in December, January, and now we're implementing a CRM now finally. But my view of things to do and change the business were large. And then when it actually happened, and I was, learning and doing all the transition items, everything got put on hold.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Fair enough. So 6 months in, now you're getting to the CRM. I think that's completely reasonable time frame. And something I've told a number of people in the past, don't go in day one, guns a-blazing, and try to change things that have been a certain way for years and years. You're just going to make people upset. You're going to rock the boats too much. Employees and other people, stakeholders in the business are on edge and nervous about the transition anyway. All the employees are usually worried they're going to lose their job for some reason. Vendors are worried that you're going to find other sources. So going in with a level head, with a consistency mindset at first, I think is a great way to do it. And then to your point, you start learning more. It's easy as an outsider to say, oh yeah, we'll change this and this and this, and we'll make 10x profit next year. But once you actually get in there and start doing the day to day, you realize that, that actually probably shouldn't change. That's a pretty solid system for whatever reason. It works, and it's not going to be worth the hassle and headache to try to change it right now. Maybe in a couple of years, maybe never. So I think 6 months is a very reasonable time frame to first start a shift like a CRM.
Yeah, nobody likes change either.
No.
So.
No, they sure don't. So are you in the business day to day? Are you like at the office every day working with the employees? And
Yeah. I'm really active, Ben.
Nice. That's good. It's a good way to learn the business and figure out which of your changes are going to be most effective and when to actually start pulling the trigger on more of them. Any other tidbits or words of wisdom or information about the business buying process that you'd like to share with the audience?
As a whole, I learned, I think, just making sure that everybody knows what you want and what you're looking for. You end up seeing it and doing opportunities then. If I didn't share with a couple people what I was doing or what I was looking to exit, what I was wanting to buy, I wouldn't have got those 6 pieces of advice. I wouldn't have been connected with the person I already knew that was going to buy a window cleaning company if I didn't tell the broker. I would have been starting a franchise from scratch if I didn't go to the mentorship group and tell the 2 people in that industry what I was looking at doing. I would have been, who knows, could have been better, could have been worse, but
yep.
The more people that know your goals and what you want to do, the better. And a lot of people are guarded on those items. And I've learned that that's when you get some large traction when other people know what you're wanting to do.
I like that a lot. That's it's something a lot of us, including me, struggle with sharing too publicly what I'm looking for, what I'm trying to do. But it has benefited me in the past. That's how I bought my commercial plaza. I just kept telling the owner that I wanted to own the plaza, and eventually he sold it to me. So it's when you are willing to share with people, you'll get good results from people. When you let them know, you need to be a little bit more specific about what you're letting them know. So narrowing down what you want and what your goal is helpful before you start telling people. On that note, I will take us out of here. If you enjoyed this episode and you enjoyed hearing about Jason's story, please take a second to hit subscribe on your podcast app or follow or whatever that button says so that you can be notified when we drop new episodes. I really appreciate you, Jason, for being here with me today. It's been an awesome conversation, and I look forward to hearing more about your business again in a few years. Thank you. Cheers.
Thanks for listening to Business Buying for Financial Independence. If you're serious about owning your time and building long-term wealth, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next episode.